It's 2004 and a new Batman movie begins production. Warner Brothers is ready to reboot the cinematic Batman franchise, and the whole world gets excited when the studio releases the first image of the new Batman. DC Comics realizes this is going to be huge, and now they want to make the Batman comics feel more like the new Batman movie, matching the storytelling tone as well as the visual style of the film. To make this happen, DC Comics created War Games, the most ambitious Batman storyline of the mid-2000s that changed the Batman comics like never before. War Games is most famous for turning Black Mask into one of the most dangerous Batman villains, but the story is also infamous for mistreating, destroying, and straight-up killing characters and elements of the Batman mythos. Now, on its 20th anniversary, it's time to look back at this controversial story that went from being the most epic Batman crossover of the mid-2000s to becoming one of the most forgotten and ignored Batman stories ever. This is the story of how DC Comics orchestrated the most humbling and humiliating defeat of Batman, and this is the only warning that if you don't like spoilers, then you're gonna love War Games. Our story begins in January of 2004, when DC started changing the Batman comics to follow the same style of the upcoming Batman movie, hiring a new creative team for Detective Comics that consisted of artist Pete Woods and writer Anderson Gaybridge. Together they created grounded, serious and mature stories with dark and realistic art, all of which was completely different from what had come before. The new stories were rather bleak and morbid, exploring serious themes such as teenage pregnancy and child abuse, while the realistic art complemented the gloomy tone of the stories, showcasing a very human Batman full of flaws, insecurities, and weaknesses. This characterization of Batman was definitely influenced by the new Batman movie, which was also going to be an origin story featuring a solitary Batman without allies, a true outlaw, wanted by the police. This was the continuity that DC wanted for the Batman comics, and the Batman editors came up with War Games, an epic story that would be presented as a massive crossover in all the Batman titles, just like Nightfall and No Man's Land. The main goal of War Games was to make the Batman comics similar to the new Batman movie, and so the Batman editors gathered all their writers and told them that they were getting rid of the Batman family, going as far as killing one of the characters. Some of the writers didn't like this idea, but there was no room for discussion. The decision was final, and DC Comics assigned the new creative team in Detective Comics to develop War Games, starting with a carefully planned prelude that began in issue number 790, where Batman and Batgirl stop a drug-dealing racket. On the surface level, this would seem like a regular Batman story, but deep inside, it's not, because this was the first time the new Batgirl was the main sidekick in the main Batman comics, and also the characterization of Batman is all weird. He's way too violent and brutal, and only at the end it's revealed that he was acting like that because it was Jason Todd's birthday. As it turns out, Jason Todd was born on August 16, which is also my birthday, and to be honest, it feels really weird to share birthdays with Jason. But what's even weirder is how Bruce and Cassie both bring up Stephanie Brown while talking about Jason. Bruce goes as far as being concerned that Stephanie will meet a similar end to that of Jason, pushing the narrative that a spoiler is just as reckless as Jason was. None of this made any sense. It came out of nowhere, and it was a forced narrative to foreshadow the ending of the story, as they had already decided to kill Spoiler. This was the start of the destruction of the Batman family, and Stephanie Brown was doomed from the very first chapter. Over the next 6 months, the prelude continued in Detective Comics, where the new creative team slowly and carefully set the stage for the big crossover. In the early chapters, they established the deep connection between Batman and Leslie Thompkins, who will become an instrumental character by the end of the story. Batman also starts working with Orpheus, a character who was created back in 2001, but who was never used in any Batman story until now, when Batman recruits Orpheus and helps him become the leader of the street gangs of the neighborhood known as the Hill. Batman then brings another character to become Orpheus's bodyguard, and her name is Onyx. She was a very minor character who barely made a handful of appearances in the pre-Crisis Green Arrow stories, so it's quite a shock that they even remembered her. The new Onyx, however, has a drastic makeover, as not only her appearance and personality are different, but now she's also a former member of the League of Assassins. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't recognize this Batman, who not only gets himself new agents left and right, but he doesn't mind that they were former killers. Another example happens in the next story, when Batman worked with Tarantula, another killer who was recently created as a supporting character for Nightwing. This Tarantula, however, comes across as a cheap version of the Huntress, who had recently joined the Birds of Prey and who was no longer working in Gotham. And so they came up with this $3 version of the Huntress, who was not only a killer but also raped Nightwing in his biggest moment of weakness. Both of these moments happened right around the same time as Batman and Tarantula worked together, which is plain wrong and awful. And that's the main feeling I got from this prelude, where many characters become part of the Batman mythos with the stories that feel forced, while the characterization of Batman becomes awful and obnoxious, and the art looks stiff, dull, and downright mediocre. The downside of trying to make the art as realistic as possible is that it ends up looking weird, with bad perspectives, boring compositions, and strange choices, like Batman's eyes being completely black most of the time. This was an obvious effort to make him look like Christian Bale's Batman, but they go as far as making Bruce's real eyes completely black, making him look dead inside, just like I felt with this art. For most of the prelude, the stories were also very serious and bleak, but then the final chapters make a drastic change, and the stories become lighthearted with a very bright and cartoony art. This happened because at this point they had to start incorporating the most important character of the storyline, and she was never part of the main Batman comics at the time. Spoiler was always a supporting character in the Robin comics, and by 2004 the series was aimed towards older kids and teenagers, with bright stories and cute art. The Robin series was going through its own stories when it was taken over by Wargames, and Bill Willingham, the Robin writer, had to change plans at the last minute. Originally, they planned to have a year-long story where Tim Drake's dad discovered the truth about Robin, but they had to rush all of that in just 2 issues that came out horrendously, showing how everything was put together in a hurry. After going through all of that, Tim has no choice but to quit being Robin, and this is where Stephanie enters the picture. Steph quickly notices that Tim starts acting weird and distant, and she thinks that her boyfriend is just depressed, but just to be sure she decides to spy on him, and she watches the perfect moment when a girl kisses Tim by force, giving Steph the complete wrong idea. Steph is obviously hurt. She is completely heartbroken. Her teenage hormones are running wild, and her confused feelings are all over the place. In this emotional state, she decides to make herself a makeshift Robin costume and breaks into the Batcave, offering herself as the new Robin as a way to get back at Tim. This silly teenage drama was a nice break from the darkness of the other stories, until it was all ruined when Batman decides right then and there that Stephanie should be the new Robin. Both Alfred and Oracle realize this is a big mistake, but Batman ignores them and he trains Steph anyways, allowing the girlfriend of his former sidekick to replace him for no logical reason, and without thinking of the consequences at all. This was yet another forced moment, and Batman's characterization was broken in the process. It's a real shame that this was a forced gimmick, because Stephanie as the new Robin is actually a neat idea if they had done it seriously. I really like the concept of a female Robin in the main continuity, and Stephanie looks fantastic. Her bright and bubbly personality creates a nice contrast with the dark tone of the stories, and even though she only made a handful of appearances as Robin, almost all of them are great. I like them so much that I made a free review on my Patreon of all her stories as Robin, so make sure to check it out. My personal favorite is the story where Stephanie fights Mr. Zsasz, one of the deadliest and most dangerous Batman villains. The fight is intense, it's scary, and Steph only survives by using lethal force, almost killing Zsasz. Of course, Batman tells her that in order to work with him, she must always find a way to avoid killing. And this is brilliant, as it shows what it really takes to work with Batman. It's a perfect way to show why not everybody should make it into the Batman family, as it should be limited to only the best, the very few ones who can actually meet Batman's impossibly high standards. Unfortunately for Steph, she could never meet them, because in the very final chapter of War Drums, she makes the bonehead mistake of disobeying a direct order from Batman, risking her life during a mission to stop a deceptively dangerous killer. And so Batman has no other choice than to fire her, telling her to quit crime fighting altogether. Stephanie Brown was Robin for only a couple of months, and her failure was the final piece of the puzzle before the War Games began. Once the crossover begins, the art becomes consistent across all the comics, following the same style of realistic art, while the story kicks off with a bizarre meeting of the gang leaders of Gotham, who have all been summoned to the same place and at the same time by a mysterious person, who is actually, spoiler. After Batman fired her, Stephanie stole one of Batman's contingency plans and she set it in motion behind Batman's back, to show him that she could pull it off and prove that he was wrong about firing her. However, she didn't know that in order for the plan to work, she needed Matches Malone, who is Batman's undercover identity and who naturally never shows up at the meeting. Eventually, the tension among the criminals reaches a boiling point and they all start killing each other, turning a peaceful night into an ugly bloodbath and making Spoiler feel responsible for this massacre. The story tries to put all the blame on Spoiler, when in reality, this disaster is all Batman's fault. He was the one who allowed an emotionally confused teenager to become his sidekick without any logical reason. He trained her and gave her access to one of the most dangerous arsenals in the world, and then he fired her, messing with her head even worse than it already was. Not to mention that this was also the second time that his top secret, highly dangerous contingency plans have been stolen. After the Tower of Babel fiasco, Batman should have learned his lesson and provided better security for these plans, but apparently this is what the Batcomputer looks like. Batman did just about everything wrong, and now he has to deal with the consequences, as the massacre quickly evolves into a full-blown gang war, where all of the gangs try to destroy each other to take control of the organized crime of Gotham, creating the most exciting moment of the story so far. Gotham becomes a war zone, with riots in the streets and fires everywhere, painting the town red and unleashing chaos and destruction on a massive scale. It's hell on earth, and Batman and Batgirl are all alone out there. There is no Robin, no Huntress, no Nightwing, and the Spoiler has vanished. Not even the GCPD shows up. Batman's only agent is Orpheus, who is barely any help, while Oracle becomes stressed and overloaded with work, trying to organize things in this utter chaos. This is where the story really shines, as it presents a terrible situation escalating out of control without feeling forced. The destruction of Gotham feels organic because of how swift and effective it is, making Batman look really bad. It's not every day we get to watch Batman so helpless and unprepared, and that would have been quite interesting, except for the fact that Batman gets so lost and frustrated that he becomes a total jerk, especially to Oracle, who is doing all she can to help, but it's still not enough for Brickman. Things get so bad that Nightwing has to return to Gotham along with Tarantula, but they only make things worse, as Nightwing is mostly useless and depressed, while Tarantula takes control of one of the gangs by force. With each new chapter, the violence keeps escalating out of hand, driving Leslie Thompkins to her breaking point and changing the bright and light-hearted tone of the Robin comics. In this chapter, the gangsters follow the daughter of an important criminal all the way to Tim's high school, where Tim saves the girl and protects his friends from the attacking gangsters. One of them is Scarface, who provides an excellent and much-needed comic relief thanks to the bizarre nature of the character. Scarface truly represents the last glimmer of joy in the story, because as soon as Scarface is defeated and the puppet hits the ground, all the chips fall down and the Robin comic becomes just as violent as the rest of the story. The GCPD finally makes an appearance at the high school, but then they are brutally killed by gangsters and the situation gets worse by the minute. Tim and his friends go inside seeking protection, but just when they think they are safe, a bullet hits the girl and she collapses in the middle of the hallway. Tim tries desperately to keep her alive, but it's all hopeless as the girl bleeds to death in Tim's arms. And as if that wasn't awful enough, then they present the cover of Batman number 631, where Batman draws the outline of a dead body in a classroom board splattered with blood. It's all so shocking and morbid that it's hardly entertaining. The high school turns into a hostage situation, and Oracle prepares a rescue mission, but once again Brickman shuts her down and ignores her, instead taking Batgirl and Nightwing to break inside and secure the place. Unfortunately, they are too late to save the girl, and without thinking, Batman decides to carry her body and walk outside in broad daylight, exposing himself, Batgirl and Nightwing in front of dozens of TV cameras and hundreds of eyewitnesses. This is how the urban legend of Batman died, as everyone realized that the mythical Dark Avenger of Gotham is just a man. The public opinion also turns against Batman, and he becomes a public menace as he gets blamed for the dead girl. And the worst part about all of this is that this was yet another forced moment, because Batman didn't need to expose himself like that. There was nothing stopping Tim Drake from carrying the girl outside without Batman and the others exposing themselves. But this is the destruction of the Batman status quo that DC wanted, and they were just getting started. The gang war continues to ravage Gotham, and Batman decides that he needs to control the entire GCPD to end the war, which is of course a ridiculous idea that the new commissioner flat out refuses. Batman is so desperately in need of more people that Tim Drake decides to come back as Robin, though it doesn't really make much of a difference. Even with Robin back in action, things only get worse, as Gotham is placed under curfew and nobody is allowed on the streets at night. Then there is a citywide blackout, leaving Gotham in complete darkness. And it's only now that Batman realizes that everything that's happened is part of his contingency plan called War Games. It only took him half of the story to realize, and when he tells the rest of the Batman family about this, they are just as shocked and disappointed with Batman as I was. They can't believe that this is what Bruce does in his spare time. Coming up with plans that could potentially destroy Gotham is not very heroic after all. It's a great reaction and a fantastic critique of stories like Tower of Babel, where Batman spends time coming up with dangerous and complex plans that are only created just to backfire or to be used against him. Batman's prep time plans are always meant to show how smart and prepared Batman is, but what they really end up showing is that Batman is dangerous, reckless, and a bit psychotic. And even worse is how the plan doesn't even make sense. The main goal was to unify all the criminal gangs of Gotham into a single crime syndicate controlled by Batman, which is extremely weird. Even Batman admits that the plan was theoretical and it was never meant to happen, but now that it has, they need to follow it, and the next step is to find Orpheus, as he was meant to be the undisputed leader of the organized crime of Gotham. There's just one problem. Orpheus is still the leader of the Hill Gang, and ever since the gang war began, a mysterious man has been kidnapping, torturing, and killing the remaining gang leaders. One by one, the mysterious villain has been taking them down, and this is a phenomenal way to create suspense and build expectation. This slow and terrifying introduction of the new villain is incredibly powerful, and it's by far the best part of the story, hiding the identity of the new villain and building danger around Orpheus, who could become the next victim at any given moment. The race to find Orpheus begins and everyone starts looking for him, including Spoiler, who finally realizes what was her mistake and somehow manages to find Orpheus before anyone else. Unfortunately, she finds him just in time to watch him die at the hands of the new villain, who is finally revealed as Black Mask in this weird splash page of him playing tug of war with a Spoiler, because War Games. Visually, it's a very weak and pathetic revelation, and it would have been funny if it wasn't so bad for Spoiler. Stephanie fights with all her heart and does the best she can to stop him, but it's just not enough, as Black Mask has become a sadistic maniac who can tolerate inhuman levels of pain, and who gets excited torturing his victims. This was the first time Black Mask showed up in the Batman comics since No Man's Land, and now he's completely different. This change happened in the Catwoman comics of 2002, where writer Ed Brubaker reimagined the character with artist Cameron Stewart. Black Mask had already abandoned his actual mask in No Man's Land, but it wasn't until this story that he showed what his real burnt face looked like. This new version of Black Mask abandoned the theme of masks completely, and his madness was replaced with an obsession for painful, gruesome, and deadly methods of torture. The character was radically different, and with all of these changes, I think they should have just called him Black Skull. He even went as far as torturing the friends and family of Catwoman, and in their final fight it was presumed that Black Mask had fallen to his death. Nobody had seen Black Mask for over a year, which is why him showing up in the main Batman comics during this massive story was such a big deal. And to make sure he was taken seriously, Black Mask tortured the Spoiler in a really vile moment. The Batman comics had never been so dark and edgy before, and it's all just for shock value. There's no charm or joy to any of these, and this almost made me stop reading. But I kept going, out of morbid curiosity. After all, is there any other reason to read war games? Eventually, Batman decides that if the new police commissioner is not going to give him control of the GCPD, then he will take it by force. Like this, Batman takes over all the police radios, all the internet signals and methods of communication to command the GCPD. Then he tells them to round up all of the gangs by any means necessary and take them to Robinson Park, where he will finally put an end to the gang war. Batman wants to gather all the criminals in the same place to make Orpheus their new leader, without knowing that Orpheus is dead. Orpheus was brought back at the start of it all, and Batman even gave him a bodyguard, but it was all pointless, and now Black Mask starts impersonating Orpheus, managing to fool even Batman. This is a great sequence full of suspense and mystery, where Batman tells his enemy the entire master plan for the third and final chapter of War Games. The criminals have all been gathered in Robinson Park, but Batman has also organized the entire GCPD, telling them to surround the park and wait for his signal to go in and arrest everyone, which is quite confusing. If Batman was planning to arrest everyone, then why did he need Orpheus for? Nothing makes sense and nothing matters anyways, because Black Mask exposes Batman's plan to all of the criminals and ruins everything. Batman and his allies try desperately to keep the criminals inside, but it's all for nothing as they all leave the place and start shooting at the police, who were all waiting outside for a signal that came way too late. It's an absolute disaster as hordes of cops and criminals kill each other, while all of the heroes fail to do anything to stop Black Mask. At this point, I started thinking that instead of War Games, the story should have been called Murphy's Law, because everything that can go wrong will go wrong. Batman's plan was a fiasco, and he took control of the GCPD for nothing, which is why now the new police commissioner declares war on Batman. Only after things get this out of hand, Batman finally decides that he's done with games, and that he will start acting seriously now, because apparently things were not serious enough until now.
What is wrong with you? I mean, what is your malfunction?
As all of this happened, Spoiler had managed to break free from the torture prison, but instead of running away, she decides to stay and fight Black Mask once again. Spoiler fights fiercely this time, realizing her life is on the line and she could have killed him, but she didn't. Black Mask takes advantage of this and shoots her, and allows her to go free now that he doesn't need her anymore. Batman eventually finds the seriously injured Spoiler and takes her to Leslie's clinic, where he trusts that she will recover. But the spoiler is that she doesn't. Then the GCPD finally starts doing something, as they unleash all of their forces, their vehicles, special equipment, tactical squads, snipers, and even helicopters. It was about time this happened, but instead of using all of that to stop the criminals, they go after the vigilantes. All this time, the GCPD had all of these at their disposal, but they never showed up or used any of these to stop the gang war. The new commissioner and the GCPD were completely helpless and useless in the first part of the story, but once Batman becomes the enemy, then they bring out the big guns. Needless to say, this is yet another forced moment, and from this point onward, everything becomes forced. First, Black Mask reveals himself to the public, hijacking a live TV broadcast where he declares himself as the undisputed crime lord of Gotham and organizes all the criminals of the city to gather around Oracle's clock tower, as he believes this is the Batcave. Now, this happens because back when Black Mask killed Orpheus, there was a brief moment when Hush showed up out of nowhere to tell Black Mask the location of the Batcave, which was obviously a lie. It is never explained why Hush did this, and he never shows up again at all. Hush was only a plot device to fabricate this moment and make Black Mask attack the clock tower for the second time since No Man's Land. And even though he exposes his plans and his location live on TV, not a single cop shows up at the scene to stop him, as they are all busy fighting Batman. In fact, the GCPD and the heroes take their time getting to the clock tower, allowing Black Mask to break into the place and reach Oracle. By the time Batman and the others get there, the tower is being protected by a scarecrow monster, which is very out of place, needs a lot of context, and it's a story for another video. Now Batman breaks into the tower to save Oracle, and the final showdown begins. For the first time ever, Black Mask is able to hold his ground against Batman, showing that he has become a formidable fighter, as he and Batman are both equally matched. However, Batman slowly starts wearing him down, and I think he would have eventually beaten Black Mask, but Oracle starts freaking out for no reason, acting as if they were going to kill each other, and instead of helping Batman, she starts the self-destruction sequence of the clock tower, forcing Batman to save her and leave Black Mask to die in the explosion. The clock tower blows to pieces and it's consumed by fire in the most blatantly forced moment of the story, with Oracle acting helpless and irrational, endangering herself and others and probably killing a man. But before any of us can question what happened, Batman is immediately summoned to Leslie's clinic, where he watches Stephanie die. And to make it all worse, the final page of the story reveals that Black Mask survived the explosion, and he is now the undisputed crime lord of Gotham. It's no exaggeration to say that War Games has the bleakest and most depressive ending of any Batman story. Batman was not only defeated, he was utterly humiliated. This is a story where Batman does more harm than good, as everything bad that happens is his fault. It was his fault that Stephanie got her hands into his contingency plans, starting a gang war that destroyed Gotham and got her killed. It was his fault that he became a public figure and that the GCPD turned against him, not to mention how he constantly mistreated his friends and allies. War Games is a story that intentionally makes Batman look bad, and it succeeds, which is why it's one of the least popular Batman stories that nobody really likes to talk about. The story would have been much better if all the bad things that happened were not Batman's fault, but rather a grand evil scheme designed and orchestrated by Black Mask, elevating the character into the ultimate Batman villain, capable of tearing down and destroying everything that Batman stands for. But instead, it's Batman who hands the city to him on a silver platter by making mistakes that destroy everything that he had built. The story successfully turned Batman into an outlaw and a loner by destroying his reputation and relationships. After all the mistreatment she endured, Oracle was the first to leave Gotham along with her father. Then it was Tim Drake, because right after losing Stephanie, thanks to Batman, Tim's dad was immediately killed in the awful storyline called Identity Crisis. Both Tim Drake and Batgirl join Tarantula in Bloodhaven, following the Penguin, who also leaves Gotham to avoid Black Mask. Batman's only allies left are Catwoman and Onyx, who don't really work with him anymore. Even Nightwing has to take some time off, as he was shot in the leg and needs time to recover. This is how War Games turned the Batman comics into Batman Begins, destroying everything to bring back the original status quo, with only Batman and Alfred as it was in the beginning. However, there was one character left to deal with, and she was eventually taken care of in the aftermath of the story. War Crimes came out a couple of months later, and the story deals with the public consequences of the death of Stephanie Brown. Her father, the Clue Master, makes an unexpected comeback to expose a corrupt reporter, while Black Mask impersonates Batman to frame him and gets in a ridiculous fight with the Joker. Batman eventually stops them both, but Black Mask manages to escape anyways. Now, all of that was just a distraction, as War Crimes was created only to separate Dr. Leslie Thompkins from the Batman mythos. By the end of the story, Batman learns that Leslie intentionally killed Stephanie by not giving her the proper treatment and medication that she needed, hoping that Stephanie's death would make a difference, making Batman and the others quit. And this is a perfect example of character assassination, as it's the most stupid thing they could have come up with to ruin this character. Naturally, Batman decides to cut off all relationships with Leslie, because he doesn't involve himself with murderers, unless they are Onyx and Tarantula. I guess he doesn't really have an issue with murderers, except when the story requires. This is by far the worst ending to a Batman story I have ever read. It was so bad that only a couple of years later, DC Comics brought back Chuck Dixon, the co-creator of Spoiler, to bring her back, in a story that reveals that Leslie had just faked Stephanie's death. The return of Spoiler is a great example of what happens when comics are created with love. Love for the medium, the stories, the characters, and the fanbase. And it's this love that is missing from War Games. This is a story that was created with nothing but hate and contempt for the Batman mythos. A story that is morbid, vile, and also pointless. It goes to show how the DC executives and the Batman editors at the time didn't give a flying bat about the stories they were creating. The best example of this is Anderson Gaybridge, the new writer they hired for Detective Comics and who was the main creative voice of War Games. Gaybridge was hired to write mature, grounded, and serious stories, but most importantly, it seems he was hired because he hated Spoiler. Gaybridge was a Hollywood actor who had written only one comic in 2003 about how inadequate and unprepared Spoiler was. That was his only contribution to comics, and DC gave this random nobody with no experience the total creative control of their biggest Batman event of 2004. And after Gaybridge was done with War Games, he barely made any more comics, basically disappearing from the comic book landscape. To me, this looks as if DC Comics hired a hitman to destroy the Batman mythos and then disappear without a trace. And that's a real shame, because this was the most organized and carefully planned storyline of the Batman comics in the 2000s. Everything that happens in the story was carefully and meticulously planned to make War Games work. It was a great effort of organization and planning that reminds me of the planification that went into Nightfall. It's just unfortunate that all of this effort was wasted in this misguided story with an awful concept and an even worse execution. This was also the last massive Batman storyline published across all the Batman titles, because nobody wanted to buy up to 10 comics every month for 3 months just to get one awful story. The story was hardly successful, and DC Comics never created another Batman crossover on this scale ever again, and the real legacy of War Games is that it became the Batman crossover that ended all Batman crossovers. I can definitely understand why someone might love War Games. It is a really dark chapter featuring the complete downfall of Batman in one of the worst moments for the character. It is without a doubt the most humbling defeat for Batman, which is something we rarely ever see, and for that alone, the story is notable. War Games is a great example that Batman is human, that he is far from perfect, as he can and will make awful mistakes. It shows that Batman is not always prepared, that he doesn't always win, and that no matter how bad things get, Batman will always get back up and keep going, even after his home is burned down to ashes. Oh wait. Wrong story. War Games should be the ideal story for Batman haters, but not even they would go near this one, because after all, this was not a fair story. Batman never had a chance of winning because all the odds were stacked against him, as the very same people in charge of the story wanted nothing more than to tear Batman down and watch him lose, forcing the story and the characterization in awful ways to make it happen. All of this, combined with dreadful stories, realistic art, and ugly covers, is the reason why nobody likes to talk about War Games. The very final chapter of the story came out in 2005, and in the final page of that comic, DC presented a small tribute to Jim Aparo, one of the greatest Batman artists of all time, who passed away in 2005. And I think it's curious how one of the most exciting and vibrant Batman illustrators passed away around the same time as Batman became the most drab it has ever been. I guess that what I'm trying to say is that every day is a good day to read some Jim Aparo Batman. And on that note, this has been Wargames. Thank you very much for watching this video, and a special thanks to Thomas Mori, Wallscaler Batman, John Papp, Caronade, Alan Parr, Marco Daniel, Wolves Regan, Gaetano Barreca, Trini Martinez, Friend of the Yokai, Magister Praeceptorum, and all of my patrons. Thank you all so much for your support, and I will see you in the next one.